Woo! Hi, everybody. Oh, my goodness. My emotions are right here as I look out. I see the people that I love most. I see people that I have known for years and years and years. So thank you. So this came about because I travel around the country. I have been talking for a few years, more than a few years now, about what's going on with our kids, anxiety, the issues that we're dealing with, stress. And I thought, gosh, you know, I haven't talked in my neighborhood. And so here I am talking in my neighborhood and talking about Mr. Rogers, which also brings my emotions right up here. My son, my younger son, Brackett, I told him I was going to do this talk on Mr. Rogers. And I said, it seems really popular. People are signing up to come. And he said, oh my God, Mom, you boomers and Mr. Rogers. It's like a moth to a flame. And I said, well, I will happily be a moth to his flame. And you know, when Mr. Rogers came out in 1967, 68, I was about 2.5 years old. And so I grew up with him. I listened to what he said, and I heard, and it's a part of who I am. All of you who are about my age, that's how we feel about Mr. Rogers. And he said these words, and he gave us room, and that's what I want to talk about tonight is the overlaps in my work and what it is that Mr. Rogers has helped us all with. There has never been a better time to have a resurgence in the lessons that he taught us. Remember he used to say right at the end, it's such a good feeling, right? And then he'd get to that last part, and he would say, and I'll be back when the day is new, and I'll have more ideas for you. And then he would say to me, and for those of you who know me, he was saying this to me, and you'll have things you'll want to talk about. And I was like, yes, I will. Yes, I will. I will always have things I want to talk about. So here I am 50 years later, and I have things that I want to talk about. What are the things that we really need to pay attention to with our kids right now? What are the things that we're doing that maybe aren't working so well? And these are three of them: elimination, and permanence, and isolation. And what happens if we start talking about allowing? What happens if we start talking about malleability? What happens if we start talking about connection? When we get into this elimination strategy, when we start telling kids and ourselves that we have to get rid of things, we are currently in an elimination culture. We like to get rid of stuff. We like to declutter our houses so then we can go on Amazon Prime and fill up the clutter again, right? Historically, we like to get rid of food groups. For those of you who are about my age, remember when we were young and even when we were training, and we got rid of fat and protein. Do you remember that? And we want to get rid of feelings. We want to get rid of grief. We want to get rid of discomfort. And when it comes to anxiety, that's what it wants. It wants to get rid of discomfort. It wants to get rid of uncertainty. It wants to take those things away. But when we start thinking about allowing, making room for different feelings, for different expressions of who we are and what we want, when we start saying to kids, it's okay if you feel that way. I was watching a little video recently of a professional athlete, and they were doing a little behind-the-scenes thing, and he was there with his little boys, and it was so cute, and they were playing together, and he was going to go off and start the season. And he said to his older son, now, what do you have to remember? What did I tell you when I'm not around? And this adorable little 8-year-old boy said, no crying, no whining. And I thought, oh my goodness. I know that's not the message that he's trying to give his little boy, but we're so quick to do that. We're so quick to move in. And what I want families to understand and what I want parents to understand, step one is that you have a thought, you have a feeling, you have a sensation. We can't control what we think most of the time. We often can't even control what we feel. They just come up. We have all sorts of sensations. Have you ever had a dream and you wake up in the morning and you think, oh my gosh, I just created that in my brain? It's all over the place. The step one is what happens. The step two is how we teach kids to manage these things. How do they respond? What do they do next when it shows up? So Mr. Rogers had a thought about that, and let's listen to what he said.
You know, everyone has lots of ways of feeling. And all those ways of feeling are fine. It's what we do with our feelings that matter in this life. I trust that you're growing in ways that will help you with whatever feelings you may have when you're a child and when you're a grown-up.
The message that I want kids to have is that if you're uncomfortable or you're unsure as you're learning something new, you're supposed to feel that way. Of course you're going to feel uncomfortable. I couldn't do my job if somebody passed a law that said you couldn't say of course anymore, Lynn. I wouldn't be able to do my job. I had a young woman in my office a few weeks ago, and she's been doing great and working on her anxiety, and she was headed off to take her driver's license test. Right from my office, she was going down to the DMV to take her driver's license test. And she said, "Oh, I'm so nervous." And I said, "Of course you are. I'm nervous for you." And she said, "What if I don't pass?" I said, "You'll be like me. I hit a car during my first driver's test in the parking lot." She said, "Oh my God, that must have been terrible." I said, "It was terrible." I sobbed. I was so humiliated. And then I went back the next time, and I was even more nervous the next time because this is important to you. So of course you're going to be anxious. Of course. Your heart's going to pound. Your mom's heart is going to pound. The mom said, "My heart is already pounding." The mom said, "You really hit a car?" "Yes!" I really did. I'm on the right track. If I'm nervous, if I'm uncomfortable, I'm on the right track. Mr. Rogers was clear that we needed to give kids the room to talk about their feelings, to roll around in them, to get used to them, not for us to step in and eliminate them, not to make it so easy that they don't have practice handling the distress that shows up as a normal course of being a human being. So there are these elimination traps, I call them. These things that we step in with the best of intentions to make sure that our kids are doing okay, because that's what we want. Nobody comes into my office and says, "Hey, look, my goal is to screw up my kid," although it's not that hard, but nonetheless. These elimination traps, so there are two of them actually, and they might surprise you, these two words, these elimination words. The word safe and the word best. They're such loaded words. And when I go into schools and they say, "Well, we've created this safe room so that if you're having a tough time, you can go into this room, it's a safe space." Except, what does that imply about the rest of the school? That I've heard people say, "Well, I'm working with somebody who's experienced some trauma, and so in the school we've identified her safe person." But what does that imply about the rest of the people? Being safe, the goal of being safe all the time is unrealistic. And it shuts down their exploration. It shuts down their ability to move through things that feel difficult and feel uncomfortable. A few years ago, I was out on my bike. I rode bike, and so I was with some of my friends, and one of them might be here now. And we were riding, and we were going, and so we went from Concord, and we went up to Bow. This is why it's nice to be in Concord, because you all know what I'm talking about. So you go through Concord, and you go up to Bow, and then if you get up to that hill in Dunbarton, the top of that hill, and there is the beautiful little cute Dunbarton Elementary School. And it was June as we were riding our bikes, and here's what it said on their sign in June as they were sending kids off for the summer. This is what they said. They weren't even trying to hide it. Right? Because sometimes they say, "Have a safe and happy summer." Or sometimes it says, "Be safe and read books." Dunbarton, they were just going straight at it. Be safe. I go into a lot of schools in August and September. I said to these teachers in front of me, so this was the sign that I saw, be safe. How many of you, as you are coming back to start this school year, how many of you, you see your friend, you haven't seen her, oh my gosh, Marjorie, oh, you look great, oh, what a nice, oh, I love your haircut, how was your summer? Oh my gosh, my summer was so safe. It was the safest summer ever. I mean, if only every summer could be that safe. We made no memories. We had no adventures, but man, it was safe. Right, it was so safe. My brother sent me this picture that he took at a hotel pool, right? What fun! Let's go, kids! No playing or jumping, but everybody in! I just want you to know that in my family, we fully support jumping. That is my son's good friend Adam jumping out of an airplane this summer. My son jumped right after him. I, to be honest, did not think it was such a great idea at the time, but he wanted to do it, and they learned a lot from that experience. So what happens when we start talking about best? Oh, how many times do we say with the best of intentions to our children, as long as you know you've done your best? Sounds like an okay thing to say, doesn't it? As long as you've tried your best. What if I were picking out this outfit and I said to my husband, what do you think? This is what I'm going to wear when I talk tonight. And he said, as long as you think that's the best you can do. Some kids we say that to, right? So they're doing their project and it's on the dining room table and it's a hot mess, right? And you look at it and you say to them, as long as you think that's your best. And they're like, yep, that's my best. Whoop, out they go. But what if you've got a kid who's a little perfectionistic? What if you've got a kid who is really not sure what their best is? What if you've got a kid who's heard from you with the best of intentions that what counts is that they've done their best? That's a hard thing for kids to figure out. That's a hard place to be as a little person and as a big person. If you were at work and you did this project and you gave it to your boss and you said, what do you think? And he says, if you think that's your best, we have to be careful with that word. So what do we say instead? What do we teach instead? The ability to know when enough is enough. The ability to discriminate between when you really have to give it in your all and when it's okay to coast, because sometimes it's okay to coast. The thing that I teach the kids that I see that are perfectionistic, the skill that they don't have is the ability to cut corners. The ability to know the difference. Being your best all the time is really, really hard. This system that we've created for them, this system that has them take 5 AP classes, and this system that sends notifications to parents' phones whenever the grade point average changes, this system that allows you to go and see exactly every assignment being handed in and what the teacher is doing with the grades, they didn't create that system. We did. And we're putting them in it. And we're asking them to be okay at the very time that we are monitoring their every mood. And the reality is that they're not handling it very well. Stress and anxiety continue to rise. Depression has not peaked, and the fastest growing group of depressed people in this country are the young people, the 18 to 24-year-olds. Their ability to manage, their ability to step into uncertainty, their ability to not know what's going to happen and be okay, their ability to get their hearts broken, their ability to fail their driver's test or to fail a test, all of that needs to be practiced. It needs to be learned, and they need to be loved through it. If we say to kids, it's okay if you make mistakes, but we don't back that up, We don't talk about our own mistakes. We don't share our own mistakes. One of my favorite things to have families do is to sit at the dinner table and talk about what unexpected thing happened to you today and how did you manage it? What went wrong and what did you do about it? Because kids watch us and they watch us go through their lives and they're either seeing us do everything perfectly because we've got it all figured out, or they're seeing us make a mistake and lose it. We need to show them how it's done. One little boy came into my office many years ago and he was all sort of like this. I go, "What's the matter?" He goes, "I don't know how to do my taxes yet." I said, "You're 7. He said, "I know, but it looks so hard." This was about April 17th. He had watched his parents do the taxes over the weekend. It did not look fun to him. From his observation, life was hard. How was he going to be able to manage it? What was he going to be able to do? So malleability and flexibility are the opposite of what anxiety demands. Anxiety demands rigidity. It wants to know exactly what's going to happen. It wants to make sure that nothing goes wrong. It wants to feel comfortable. And one of the things I see happening so often in schools and in homes too, and again, you do it with the best of intentions, is that you step in and say, let's make sure we have a plan so that everything goes as planned. And when I say to parents, well, tell me when this worry thing shows up. When does it really go awry? They say, as long as everything goes as planned, as long as we stick to the plan, everything's okay. But when something goes wrong, when something unexpected happens, that's when things explode. The ability to say, I don't know. The ability to roll around in the mights and maybes of life. Of course we want to give kids external reassurance. Of course we want to make sure that they feel secure and loved when they're little. But excessive external reassurance, stepping in to make sure that they know exactly what's going to happen, that a school says, we're going to make sure that they have exact information, that any deviation in the schedule will make sure that they're warned ahead of time. I hear that all the time. It backfires big time. I had a boy who was having difficulty with fire alarms and fire drills, which is not an unusual thing for kids to be nervous about, of course. And so the school had put this plan in place that he would get warned before every fire drill, and he would be removed from the classroom ahead of every fire drill. And at some point, his parents began to think that maybe this had gone on too long. He was in 8th grade, and they were still taking him out of the classroom and warning him ahead of time. And so we said, well, let's stop doing that. He didn't like this at all. He would find people in the school, because he was really friendly and cute and everybody loved him. He would find people in the school, and maybe the lady who worked in the cafeteria or the librarian, and he would say, hey, I know you're not supposed to tell me when there's a fire drill, right? But if you just give me a little this or a little this. He wanted to know, well, what's the skill that kids need to learn with fire drills? What do they need to be able to do? Well, sure, they need to be able to follow instructions. They need to be able to get in line and get out of the building, but the most important thing that they need to do is they need to be able to be startled. They need to be able to be scared and then follow instructions. Teaching kids how to follow instructions and eliminating the part of being startled and scared, that's not the point of a fire drill. Because they learn how to walk out of buildings every day. They learn how to follow directions every day when they're getting on the bus, when they're going to the cafeteria. The part they need to handle is the part they don't want to handle. It's the unexpected. It's the uncertainty. When kids are anxious and when they're rigid, it's hard socially because they don't want other people to break the rules. I was talking to a family and they said their little boy would be out on the playground, right? Yelling at the other kids. Slides are for going down, not for going up. And the other third graders didn't appreciate his interference. The brain is incredibly malleable. It is capable of learning amazing things. What we really have to pay attention to, and this is huge, is this language of permanence that's been showing up. When we talk about our kids' mental health, when we say this is who you are, that this is the way you are and this is who you will be for the rest of your life. Now again, we're not doing it on purpose, but that's even what they're being taught in school. That if you're diagnosed with depression, you have a disease. This is the way your brain is wired. You'll have to deal with this for the rest of your life. The reason I know they hear that is because they tell me and because I hear it too. I hear it on ads on television. I see it in public service campaigns. This is who you are. Now, what we're trying to do is to bring mental health issues to the forefront so that people can talk about them openly. And I think we've done a much better job with that with our young people, being able to talk about what they're struggling with, being able to get help when they're struggling. But the pendulum has swung far in another direction. This direction of identity, this direction of disease, this direction of this is who I am. There's an awful lot of research about something called positive expectancy. Positive expectancy is the belief that things will change. And when we look at the research about positive expectancy, people need this when they're healing from cancer, when they're healing from back surgery, when they're healing from loss, and when they're healing from depression, when they're healing from trauma, when they're healing from anxiety. If you don't have the belief that things can change, why would you do anything? And when a kid gets to why bother, that's when we really need to pay attention. That's a dangerous place for anybody to be without hope. There was one public service campaign that I like. It started many years ago by Dan Savage. It was that campaign, perhaps some of you are familiar with it, It Gets Better. That this is not who you are. This is not who you're going to be. David Yeager did some research a few years ago. And he and his colleagues took on quite an ambitious project. They were trying to figure out how to make high school less stressful for high school students. And so they did a bunch of different things, and they were really looking at this growth mindset, this flexible mindset. And one of the things they did that was pretty amazing was that they took incoming freshmen. A lot of their research was done in Texas. They took incoming freshmen, and during the first few months of school, they talked to these freshmen about how they weren't done yet. They talked to them in particular about how socially things changed during the course of high school. That they weren't done yet. They did reading exercises and writing exercises, and the message was consistently, people can change. These kids reported as they went through high school that life was less stressful for them because when they bumped up against something, when they bumped up against a different relationship issue, when they bumped up against something stressful, this message that they had learned early on was right there for them. They told the researchers this. I knew it wasn't permanent. I knew that things would change. A message of permanence when we're talking to kids is something we really need to pay attention to. We want a message of flexibility. We want a message of malleability because in that is a message of hope. That's what keeps kids moving in the right direction. We take away that, and what's left?
I was also editor of the yearbook my senior year and president of the student council in my senior year at high school. Very different from my freshman year in high school. I was a very shy kid. I was the Daniel Striped Tiger of that school, I'm sure. But something happened, and you can never truly, completely understand why. But there was this kid who was in our church whose name was Jim Stumbaugh.
So Mr. Rogers goes on to tell a story about this kid, Jim Stumbaugh. And what happened was that Jim was a real hero of the class. He was the star athlete. He was academically incredibly well-known and well-liked. And Jim got hurt and he was in the hospital. And so Fred got the assignment of bringing his homework to Jim in the hospital so that he could keep up. And Mr. Rogers said that he was surprised that he was given that job. And Jim was very surprised when Mr. Rogers, I guess he didn't call him Mr. Rogers then, when Fred walked into his hospital room. But Mr. Rogers said they began to strike up a friendship. And he said that Mr. Rogers began to see Jim for more than just this star athlete that he was intimidated by. And Jim began to see Fred as more than this shy kid. And he said the difference in me between my freshman year and my senior year, based on the fact that I made friends with someone who was so different than I was. And I guess Jim sort of introduced him to new people. And you hear Mr. Rogers say, I don't know what happened. I don't know why it happened. But he came out of his shell. And he started showing the world who he was. It's such a wonderful story. When we're thinking about connection, this is the third thing. We've got a problem with isolation in this country. One of the things that they're beginning to pay attention to in the research is reported levels of loneliness amongst our young people. And a study came out quite recently that said that teenagers are reporting their own loneliness at rates that are 50% greater than the elderly in this country. If you are 16, 17 years old, you are lonelier than people that are over the age of 72, as reported by the teens themselves. This is something that we should pay attention to. Because what's happening is that we have taken positive connection and we have started replacing it with negative connection. We have started thinking about worry and anxiety and depression as ways to connect, as our identity, as this is who I am. I'm seeing something consistently in the high schools that I'm going to called one-upping, where if you say, well, I'm really depressed, they say, oh, you think you're depressed? Think of how depressed I am. If they say, oh, you think you're anxious, I'm this anxious. You think you're on this many medications, I'm on this many medications. They're doing it a lot with sleep. I only got 4 hours of sleep last night. Well, I only got 2, as if this is a badge of honor. It's how they're connecting, not based on what they're doing well, but based on how they're suffering. That's an interesting thing. The fear expressed by parents about their children's safety, about their children's achievement, is pervasive, and it's everywhere. One of the things we know is that kids that are raised in worried households experience the world as more dangerous than kids that are not. And part of that is because of something called safety chatter. Safety chatter is when adults express fears in front of children. And they might be doing it about their own fears, but they're also doing it about the world. Be careful, watch out, don't do that. The world is a dangerous place is what they're saying, and our kids are listening. And they're retreating. They're not stepping out into the world, and we're not letting them. I implore you, and I'm serious about this, if you are tracking your children on one of those cell phone apps, you should stop today. Knowing where your kids are all the time, and your children knowing where you are all the time, is problematic. And people will say to me, well, you know what, I just need to know where they are in elementary school, or I just need to know, in high school, and then when they go to college, then I'll stop doing it. An article came out in the Wall Street Journal a few months ago that said that parents who track their children when they're little and through their adolescence are continuing to track them into college. And I know it's true, because they tell me. Here's the other reason why you want to stop tracking your kids. And I'm not saying you should stop communicating with your kids, right? So if your child gets home from work before you and you want to know that they arrived, and they're going to send you a text that says, Mom, I'm home, or Dad, I'm home, or Grandma, I'm home, that's all well and good. But what happens when we take these devices and we say, okay, so these devices will take care of everything. These devices, you don't have to think about me. You don't have to communicate with me. You just go ahead and live your life. It was like when my son was playing baseball, if he was coming back on the bus, right, and I'm supposed to meet him and pick him up in the parking lot, and if I were tracking him on his phone, right, say there was traffic at the toll, say they stopped at Wendy's on the way home, and I'm saying, well, I'm tracking him, right? The message I'm giving to him is I'm saying, listen, little prince, I don't want to interfere at all in your, bus stuff. So there's no reason for you to interrupt what you're doing and send me a text, because our machines are coordinated and communicating. So when you get off that bus, I will be there the moment you arrive. No effort required by you. I was talking to a mom about this. I was telling her, you got to stop tracking your daughter on her cell phone. She was in high school. She says, but we live 15 minutes away. And so she's coming back from a cheer competition. And what if she falls asleep on the bus and she doesn't text me and the bus arrives and I am not there waiting for her? I said, I bet she won't forget again. Or she'll enjoy the 15 minutes of solitude before you arrive. And the mom laughed nervously. The other thing we need to pay attention to is the difference between social comparison and social connection. When you are on Snapchat by yourself in your bedroom, that is not social connection. That is social comparison, and there's something called social comparison theory. Social comparison theory says that unless you're a flaming narcissist, when you compare yourself to somebody else, you generally compare down. And we know that happens on Facebook, right? 'Tis the season of holiday cards. I get holiday cards sometimes from my clients, and I have to laugh because I know what happened. It all looks good in the photo. I'm an anxiety specialist, and it's rather remarkable. Wherever I go, people find that out, and then they tell me a story. So I don't tell people that on airplanes. I was at a thing recently, doing a thing, and so somebody was doing my makeup for the thing that I was doing. So she's doing my makeup, and she says, you're going to talk about anxiety? I said, yeah. She said, I have anxiety. And I said, oh, yeah, join the crowd. She said, but I've learned how to manage it. I go, great, right? And she's doing my eyes, and she says, so what I've learned is that I really just need to listen to my body. That when I feel anxious, that's a sign that I need to pay attention to. Now, in the old days, I would have said, no, but, I'm say, oh, She says, and it's about relationships. So if I'm in a relationship and I start having these, feelings in my body, that means I got to get out of the relationship. And that really works for me. And I said, that's great. So then I talked for 2 hours, and she was there listening the whole time because she would come in and touch up this and touch up that. And after I was done, she came up to me and she said, Lynn? I said, yeah. She said, all the stuff I was telling you when I was putting your makeup on? Yeah. She goes, it's kind of the opposite of what you just talked about for 2 hours. I said, no, I said, I know, I didn't want to get in the way of what you were doing because it was my face you were working on. But I figured if you hung around, you'd catch on to it. It's not about getting rid of. And her notion that when she was socially connecting with someone, that if she felt uncomfortable, if it didn't feel exactly right, that meant she was to get out. How realistic is that? How many relationships do you have that feel comfortable all the time? How many times do you say something that feels awkward, or you make a mistake, or you do something and you have to go back and apologize and you have regret? That's part of being a human being. We want to give kids the opportunity to step in, to make mistakes, to feel foolish, to be embarrassed while they're connecting. Because that's actually what connects us. And these certainty devices, these things that can give us all the information that we need at any moment, is getting in the way of that. And I am not against smartphones. But if a parent says to me, you know, I'm really concerned about the amount of time that my daughter is spending on screens, I'm really concerned about how much my son is on his phone, and if that parent allows that child to have a smartphone in their bedroom at night, you have lost all credibility with me. We're allowed to limit it. You shouldn't have your smartphone in your bedroom at night either. Mr. Rogers said this a long time ago. He was talking about television. He was talking about children's television. He was talking about what he was seeing, the lack of dignity. He was a little bit of a serious guy. I think he was kind of bummed out when the, Roadrunner would get hit with an anvil. But he saw a lot of stuff that he felt was so unhelpful for young children to see about the way that we treat each other. And now, 30 years later, 40 years later, 50 years later, we're beginning to gather data on the amount of time that our children are on screens. Jean Twenge wrote an article, it was in The Atlantic in 2017. And the article was entitled, "Are Smartphones Destroying a Generation?" And spoiler alert, yes. But this is what the research is showing now. That the more that kids are on screens, the more difficult that they're having connecting. And people will say to me, yeah, but when my son is playing games with his friends, he's on doing Minecraft and I hear them laughing, that's okay. But this idea that this is where you get your information, not just about the world, but about what other people are doing, kids are experiencing rejection in real time. And it's painful, because it's painful for us on Facebook. When you look and see that everybody else got together and you weren't invited. How do you think that 13-year-olds and 14-year-olds and 15-year-olds are handling that? They have become too accustomed with saying horrible things. We have become too accustomed to hearing horrible things. And we need to pay attention to that. So there is a story about connection that really takes the cake. It's really the best story about connection that I've ever heard. It's the African violet story. So it's a story about a psychiatrist named Milton Erickson. Milton Erickson was a rogue in his time. He died in 1980. He lived in Phoenix, Arizona, and he looked at things in a different way. He was all about being creative. He was a keen observer of things. He had polio when he was a kid, so he spent a lot of time incapacitated in just watching people. And during a time when Freudian psychoanalysis was the thing, he as a psychiatrist was trying to figure out how to solve problems. So here's how this story goes. He was working with this young man, and I believe it was in Cincinnati or Milwaukee or someplace in the Midwest. This man was from. And this man contacted him. And he said, Dr. Erickson, you were so helpful to me in the past. I'm wondering if you could help me again. I have an aunt, and I'm very worried about her. She never married. She doesn't have any children. She's what we would refer to as a spinster back then. She's got plenty of means. She lives in a lovely, beautiful house. But she's not doing anything. She's not going out. She used to go to church. She's not going out to church. I think she's really depressed, and I don't know how to help her. And I'm wondering, when you're in town, because Dr. Erickson was going to be in town for some sort of medical training, when you're in town, I'm wondering if you would be so kind as to go and talk to her and meet with her and see if you can help her, because I don't know what else to do. So Dr. Erickson was very generous in this way. So he went to this woman's house, and she knew he was coming, and he knocked on the door, and she invited him in. And he talked to her briefly, and he talked to her about what her life was like, and she was pretty down in the dumps, right? She had gotten to the place of, why bother? I don't have any family. I'm getting older. Why bother? But as he was looking around in her house, and she was touring around, he noticed that in a part of her house, there were beautiful African violets on the counter. on the spaces. She even had a greenhouse where she was growing them. And I don't know much about African violets, but apparently they're very difficult to grow. And so if you can do that, you have quite a green thumb. You have quite a talent. And so he talked to her a little bit more, and he said, so you don't go to your church anymore? And she said, no, why bother? And he said, well, I'm going to tell you to do something that's going to make you feel better, and you have to promise me that you're going to do it. And he was very good at extracting promises from people. You have to promise me that what I tell you to do, you are going to do. And so she said yes. So he said, I want you every week to get the church bulletin. I don't care if you don't go to church, but I want you to get the church bulletin, and I want you to deliver in person an African violet to everybody on the church bulletin, everybody that is celebrating a job promotion or the birth of a baby, everybody who's recovering from a surgery, everybody that has suffered a loss, everybody that is mourning, everybody who's celebrating a wedding or an engagement. I want you to read the church bulletin, and I want you to show up with an African violet. And she said, well, okay, skeptically. And he went back and he told her nephew, this is what he's done. And the nephew said, Dr. Erickson, Mr. Genius Psychiatrist, and this is what's supposed to happen? You're going to have her deliver African violets? And he said, it'll work. And then he went back to Phoenix and he went on with his life. And 10 years later, he got a letter in the mail from the nephew. In the letter was a clipping from the town newspaper. And the headline said, African violet queen dies, town mourns. At her funeral, there was not an open spot in the church. The whole town came to celebrate what she had done. It was a simple act of connection. She did not die alone. She didn't die depressed. She died valued. She died loved, simply because she got out of her own experience. And when I talk about connection, one of the things that we know about anxiety and depression, they are referred to as internalizing disorders. And what that means is that we do most of the work on the inside. That people will think, well, if I'm anxious, I'm anxious about stuff out here. And if you've hung around me for 5 minutes or so, you know that I don't really care what the stuff out here is. I'm anxious about what's out here. I'm depressed about what's out here. And all of that is true. That can trigger it. That can start it. But the thing that really allows it to get a hold of you, the thing that really grips you, is the stories you tell inside. What you do inside about the things that are happening on the outside. When we are externally connected, when we are thinking outside of ourselves, amazing things happen. And this is why one of the other homework assignments that I give to families all the time is that I want you to pick a day or maybe 2 days of a week, and everybody has to do 3 things during the day that will brighten somebody else's day. And all the better if it's a stranger. Some small thing. You go through your day looking for opportunities outside of your own experiences, rather than being inside, in your room, by yourself, comparing yourself down. There's an expression in the depression world, you may hear it bantered about, you are not the best person to talk to you about you, because it's a closed circuit. How is it that we move kids back out, away from this internal focus, back to connecting to what it is that feels important? And what's your African violet? What's the gift that you have that maybe you're not sharing with the world? How is it that you look at the talents that you have and how you offer them to the people around you? If you do something wonderfully, if you bake wonderfully, if you arrange flowers, if you sing, if you write poetry, if you make quilts, if you knit mittens, you cannot keep that talent to yourself. You cannot hold it from the world. Your job is to share who you are, to show kids how to do that, because really, that's what we're doing, is that we're showing them And they're watching us, and they're learning from us. They're paying attention to how much we're on our screens, and how we manage stress, and how we talk about our own mental health, and how we freak out. We have to do better because they're depending on us. So in this interview, the question where it will pick up is the interviewer asked Mr. Rogers, how many kids do you think you've helped? And listen to what he said.
I don't care how many, even if it's just one. We get so wrapped up in numbers in our society, and the most important thing is that we're able to be one-to-one, you and I, with each other at the moment. If we can be present to the moment with the person that we happen to be with at the moment, that's what's important.
So, as I finish tonight, I am going to ask that we take a moment, that we just sit here and we think about how it is that we want to make room for kids' feelings, that we don't want to say no crying, that we don't want to step in and make sure that they're feeling no distress. One of the hardest things about raising children is when they're struggling. How do we love them and encourage and support them through that? But how do we let them take some chances? How do we loosen up our tight hold, our own fear, so that they get practice, so that they can feel disappointed and be okay? When I was a junior in high school, I was trying out for varsity basketball. And I know that that might sound, I was scrappy. And the odds of me making the team, could have gone either way. We had practice over Thanksgiving vacation. We had a practice on a Friday. And I told the coach, whose name was Sue, I told the coach, Sue, I won't be at practice because I'm going on Friday to take my driver's license test. We know how that ended. So I go and take my driver's license test. I hit a car in the parking lot. Of course, the old guy, who I thought was old, he was probably like 49, leans over, takes the key out of the ignition, and says, we don't generally pass people who hit cars during the test. And I said, I understand. So I went back to practice on Monday after the Thanksgiving weekend. And I got there, and there were 12 girls at this point, right? Almost all the cuts had been done, or so I thought. And Sue said, can I see you in the locker room? I said, sure. And I went in, she said, I've decided that I'm only going to carry 11 girls this year. I'm cutting you. And I said, oh. And she said, and also, you skipped practice on Friday. I said, I didn't skip practice. I told you that I was going to miss because I had my driver's license test. And also, I hit a car. And she said, really? Yes. Oh, gosh. She said, well, you're not on the team. And I said, okay. And I went home, and I cried some more that week. That was not a good week for me, and it was not a good week for my mom or my dad. And I remember my mom getting out the yearbook and looking through and counting and saying, she had 12 last year, she had 12 the year before. Why doesn't she have 12 this year? And I said, she didn't want me. She didn't want me. But you know what? My parents didn't get on the phone, and they didn't call the coach, and they didn't call the athletic director. Right? They hugged me, and I think we went to Friendly's. We can let our kids not be okay when we're there to show them that it's okay to not be okay. It really is so important that they have room. So let's take a moment. And while we take this moment, I'm just going to run through some quotes from Mr. Rogers that you can read and absorb in silence. Your kids don't have to do anything sensational. They don't have to be successful in the definitions that we have as successful. Parents want kids to be happy and successful. What does that mean? They're not going to be happy all the time. And they're not going to be successful in everything that they step into. But I think that what Mr. Rogers has been trying to tell us for 52 years is that we can just allow human beings to be human beings, that we can connect one-on-one, that we can take a moment to reach out, to brighten somebody's day, to share our talents, to be okay with someone's distress, to allow them, to be okay with grief, to be okay with sadness, to be okay with failure, to be okay with nervousness, to be okay with not quite fitting in this place and in this time, to be the Daniel striped tiger when you start high school or you start college. And to be able to find ways to connect. This is what our kids need, and they need it desperately. Because we've got too many that are going to the place of why bother. Too many that can't meet expectations. Too many that are measuring themselves based on the GPA and the notification that the parent gets on the phone, what their class rank is, what college they get into or don't get into, how much money they make, what car they drive, whether or not somebody likes their Instagram posts. It's gotten a little out of control, and we all know it, don't we? Nobody is sitting here saying, oh, no, I think we're on the right track. But I think the thing that I want you to hear is that it's hard work, but it's not complicated. Mr. Rogers did not make it complicated. I work very hard in my practice to not make it complicated. It's like running a marathon, man. It's 26.2 miles, it's hard work, but there's somebody gonna point you and tell you where to turn, and you just keep going. This is the message that they need to hear. And we need to step in and take some responsibility to get them off screens, to do things with your kids that don't involve sitting in front of a screen, to make rules in your house, like when we're in the car, we're not going to have our screens in front of us. You know, I remember a while ago when they put screens in minivans, I said to myself, this is the end. I had no idea what was coming. But do you remember when you were little and you were in car rides? Do you remember? Do you remember all the things you had to do? You had to get along. You had to come up with a game, some sort of barrier, because they couldn't be next to you, because we all didn't have our own bucket seat. And we had to share snacks, and we had to play the alphabet game on the signs on the highway. And we had to be bored and look out the window, and sometimes we had to barf. And I used to have to climb back into the back of the station wagon and get my dad a snack and then bring it to the front. And then the styrofoam would be squeaking, so I had to go back and fix it again, right? And it seemed like that ride was 10 days long. It was 4 hours long. But we played games. We sang songs. We just sat there together. That's what our kids need. They need our presence. They need our focus. They need our attention. They need our eye-to-eye contact. So I am so grateful that you came out. I am preaching to the converted, of course. You're the ones that showed up. And I am so appreciative of that. Again, my heart is so full. being here, to be in my neighborhood. I don't talk in my neighborhood very often. And to have this opportunity to talk to you about what I know is near and dear to you, our kids, the people we love most in the world. It's a huge responsibility. But man, can we just make it a little more fun? Can we make it a little bit more carefree? Can we let them run and jump and play? And when they're little, they can jump into the pool at the hotel. And when they're big, they can jump out of the airplane if they want. I hope that I have offered you some things to think about. I hope that you will take what I'm saying and spread it like wildfire. I know I'm not saying anything revolutionary. I know I'm not saying anything that Fred didn't start saying in 1967, but I think we just need to keep saying it. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you.